Hi, welcome to Molden and Schmidt, the podcast where we get to the bottom of the big questions about the future of motoring, and particularly how do we make it more environmentally friendly. My name's Nick Molden. I run a company called Emissions Analytics. We go around doing real-world testing to find out what really goes on when you're driving your car. With me is Oliver Schmidt. Oliver, over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Oliver Schmidt. I used to work at a major car company for years and being in charge of their powertrain strategy. So I think that qualifies me for the topic for today. I guess, Nick, you should now go on and maybe introduce today's topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, today we're tackling head on one of the big questions, which is full battery electric vehicles or hybrids. Which should we go for and which is kinder to the planet? And I noticed today there's been the latest sales figures out in the UK, and there's a definite softening of electric vehicle sales at a very robust level for hybrids. So it looks like the market is voting in one direction towards hybrids, but government policy is all pointing the other direction towards battery vehicles. How do you see it?
Yeah, it's the same trend we can see here, but somehow in Germany, hybrids aren't that famous. The only hybrids that are famous are the plug-in hybrids, because if you run those as a company car, you get some tax subsidies, and you don't have to tax them that high. So that's the reason why plug-in hybrids are pretty famous. But the normal hybrid has never picked up that big over here. Even Toyota offers the full range of hybrids, but it never picked up here. But what you see here is also a huge decline in battery electric vehicles after the government subsidies have been cut off last year. Yeah, I think it was up to 9,000 euros that you got for a car. That is gone by now. Companies try to make, so the car companies try to make it up, but they are not that successful. So I would say it has dropped by a half. It has dropped from up to a quarter of sales now to around 10-12% in sales. Depends on the month, depends on where you are in the year. But what you see here is a big rise of diesel again.
And that's really interesting because diesel was the technology of the past that was meant to deliver CO2 reductions and obviously came to a
Yeah.
bit of a sticky end. But do you see this resurgence of diesel as a temporary blip or part of a trend?
Yeah, I would say so. It's the one that I recently, so when we recently met in Prague, I drove down from here to Prague in a diesel car. And this diesel car, I drove 1,000 kilometers, and I even didn't have to refuel. And I got a gas mileage of, I would say, 5.8 liters per 100 kilometers. And I think that's what the people want. It's cheap, or kind of cheap, and you don't have the range anxiety. You go to your gas station, you refill 2-3 minutes, it's refueled, and then you go on. I think this is the main point for the diesel at the moment, is really the convenience. You run for, let's say, around 10-12 euros your 100 kilometers, depending on your gas mileage, and you don't have range anxiety.
And diesel was the sexy new technology in the 1990s and 2000s to deliver CO2. And interestingly, other bits of the world went for hybrids, particularly Japan and the United States. But Europe, through what happened with NOx emissions, was forced then to either backtrack or to go to some new technology. And that's what led Europe, in my opinion, to wholeheartedly embracing full battery electrification. But it embraced it in a way which ran ahead of what was actually possible to deliver. Particularly, battery electric vehicles are great for CO2 reduction, but you need people to actually buy them. They're no good if not enough people buy them. And my opinion on hybrid vehicles is that they are more or less the same price as a normal gasoline vehicle. So loads of people can afford them. Battery electric vehicles, the full plug-in variety, they're 30-40% more expensive. And that's why hybrids may be the better way for now to go to reduce CO2, because lots of people can afford them, even though they're not the perfect end game. Do you see it like that, or do you see the trajectory in a different?
I would say people vote with their purse or with their wallet. So it's always a question of cost. So if I now go a bit up front what we are discussing, but there are studies that say that the average comparison between a hybrid vehicle and a normal internal combustion engine is around 40 grams of CO2 per kilometer. And if I translate this to liters, it's about 1.5 liter. That equals to around €3. So the average customer does 15,000 kilometers a year. So this equals for him to €450 of saving a year. And he needs to get a payback. If he owns the car for 3 years, he pays €1,350 less for gas. This is something that he needs to get as a payback over this time. Of course, they might have a higher residual value than the other ones, but he needs to see this payback of this. And this is something that you see on the electric vehicles. If you charge your electric vehicle at home with your 25, 30 cents per kilowatt hour, and then use maybe 20 kilowatts per 100 kilometers, there's nothing cheaper to run than an electric vehicle, but you have the high price to pay, and you have the huge depreciation of the residual values of those cars. But people just vote with their money. That's my opinion for this.
And the picture has been quite distorted in my view, because the battery electric vehicles have been billed as zero emission vehicles. When they're clearly not, when you take into account how the electricity is produced and how the vehicles are made and the CO2 embedded in them. But nevertheless, one of the things which is missed, I think, is they still remain, for most people, the most effective way to reduce CO2 overall.
Of course, of course. I totally agree. And if you look, so I can only look around here in the area I live in, but if you see who is running an electric vehicle, it's most of the time the people that live in a single family home, and most of them have their solar panels on the roof, so you easily can charge your car at home basically for free. You only have to pay for the installation of the solar panels, or you have to rent them. There are already companies like 1.5 Degrees or NPEL that just where you can rent solar panels for your roof and the inverter.
So it seems to be another case where if you start by being well off, you can access lots of savings that people who are not as well off cannot access. And that's really what the sales figures seem to be telling us. We've exhausted the number of people with deep pockets who can afford to put the money up front and then reap the savings. We're now people who adding up the figures week by week, and actually it needs to deliver returns much more rapidly. And that's why hybrids seem to be the better way of doing it, because everyone in the market, there's about a 5% price premium by our analysis on full hybrids. And that's the hybrids which you don't have to plug in at all. I'm not even talking about plug-in hybrids, just normal Toyota Prius type vehicles are only about 5% more expensive. So pretty much anyone who's in the market for a car could afford that.
Yeah, that's totally right. As I just mentioned before, they just need to see the payback of their investment. If they see the payback of their investment up front, I guess they would be fine paying this 5% more. But even there, we are back to the discussion who can afford those vehicles. You see, I don't know about England, but in Germany, we see the fleet of legacy cars getting older and older per year, because people don't buy new cars. So this is only the more affluent people are buying cars at the moment, or getting company cars. So this also leads to the older cars being longer on the road. So, but you're right. If it's 5%, I totally agree. A hybrid is a very good way to reduce this. And maybe we should discuss why it is a better way. Maybe we should come up and explain the Toyota rule.
Well, yes, explain that Toyota rule. They have a very neat way of expressing the choices.
Yeah.
And from their point of view, I think it comes very much from what goes into making these vehicles. So perhaps what's Toyota's rule?
So Toyota's rule is called the 1-6-90 rule. And now this sounds stupid. This sounds like a game in football, in American football or so, when the quarterback shouts 1-6-90 and everybody runs a certain road, but that's not meant here. So what this basically means, with the rare earth and the lithium in one battery electric vehicle, you can also build 6 plug-in hybrid vehicles or 90 hybrid vehicles. And as we just discussed, the most efficient way to reduce overall fuel consumption over the fleet is to implement more hybrids. And this is just an easy calculation now. If I have 90 hybrids with saving 40 grams, like we just mentioned before, this is a saving of 3,600 grams per kilometer, and a single BEV can only save 200, 180 if we calculate him with 0 grams. So this is an easy calculation to make.
Yes, and there's a variety of calculations that have been made as to how much better hybrids are. But we did a calculation at Emissions Analytics and came to the conclusion, based on current grid carbon intensities, if we used the same amount of battery materials spread over lots and lots of full hybrids, we would reduce total CO2 emissions by 14 times more than by having a smaller number of battery vehicles. Now, I believe Toyota has an even higher ratio there, and ours is actually quite conservative. But it's an interesting paradox that by what we're saying effectively is go for the technology which actually reduces CO2 less. And why that's a paradox is because it's where technology collides with the economics. It's all very well to have something which dramatically reduces CO2, but if only a few people can afford it, it doesn't transform the market. What we've calculated is that hybrids have that potential to transform the market, maybe for the next decade. We're not saying it's the end game, but you also have, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, the criticism of a hybrid-led strategy is, well, it can only get you to 25% total reduction. That's no good. We need to get to net zero. But then my view is then you can put in 10 years' time synthetic fuels, which by that time will be at a much greater scale and price. You can put those in the hybrids and then turn your hybrids into net zero machines. Do you think that's a realistic prospect?
Of course, I totally agree with this. But if I put synthetic fuel in, then why do I need a hybrid? Why don't I just put my synthetic fuel in a normal ICE?
Well, because they're too expensive at the moment, so that's not a choice.
Yeah, but if they become broadly available, then why I don't just put it in any car on the market?
Well, what you're saying is actually in the end game, it may turn out to be people move back away from hybrids back to pure internal combustion engines. This would be the conclusion of what you just painted, the scenario you painted, which said, okay, for 10 years we have hybrid vehicles. And then in the end game, we fuel those hybrid vehicles with synthetic fuel, which has 0 CO2 emissions, maybe only the shipping from wherever it's produced to here. And then we are net zero with those vehicles. But then I can be net zero with any vehicle. And I don't need to build an intermediate fleet for 10 years of I don't know how many hybrids. Shouldn't I then push for faster access to e-fuels? But I don't think that's at a scale yet, and particularly e-fuels require access to a significant amount of green electricity to work, because you're having to electrolyze water to create the hydrogen. You're having to the CO2 from the air. Those are very, very energy intensive processes, and realistically we would need both a massive scaling of wind and solar and, in my opinion, nuclear energy to get to a level of green energy that would allow synthetic fuels to be produced at the scale required to transform the fleet. So that is something we're talking probably more like 20 years away, if everything goes well, that amount of infrastructure is built out. So we can't wait that long, otherwise all our carbon budgets will be blown. So really, we're in a second best world. That's what we have to admit, that we're having to go to grids to tide us over to the point where either synthetic fuels work or the emissions embedded in batteries are solved. More likely, some combination of the two. I would expect in the very end game, we will actually end up with a very diverse set of powertrains. depending on people's preferences. And what I'm skeptical about is the amount of investment, both in resource and financially, in converting the whole fleet from combustion engines to pure batteries. That's a big investment to change the powertrains, when actually
Yeah.
we could do a much smarter, more frugal, mixed strategy of combustion and electrification to get us to the goal.
Yeah, I guess this is something you have to calculate. So you, as we mentioned, we have different scenarios here. We have at the moment I would call it the mandated scenario, going full electric vehicle. We have the scenario going as many hybrids as possible. We have the scenario of maybe pushing e-fuels as much as possible. Maybe go to the Sahara Desert and put an abundance of solar panels there to produce the electricity needed. So this is something you could also achieve if you want to. This is something you can achieve in 5 years. If you want to build a solar factory there, you could. But the question is then, in which country are we going? Is this country stable? Are we becoming dependent on another country then? Like we had, we all know the dependency from oil. We especially here in Germany, we suffered from the dependency on gas from Russia. So this is the question. You have to evaluate all these scenarios and then come up with a perfect one. But I guess that's not going to happen. And then what you just mentioned is going to be there. We will have a combination of everything in the end. And the people that can afford a battery electric vehicle will buy it now. The people that can't afford one, but that buy a new car, maybe buy a hybrid or buy a diesel. As we know, diesel reduces CO2 too, not as much as a hybrid, but depending on their need, they buy a diesel car and so on. And the people that have the legacy vehicles, maybe one day we can offer them a synthetic fuel that is affordable. Like if you look, for example, at HVO. HVO now is available all over Europe. It became available here in Germany 1st of April, and not an April Fool's joke. It really became available. And because it's not a fuel, it shouldn't be taxed as a fuel, which at the moment it is. So it's about 10 cents more expensive than regular diesel. But this is a fuel that reduces the carbon footprint of a diesel vehicle, depending on where you get it, between 70 and 90%. So that's another way. It's already there. It's available.
And that's the fuel using waste products such as used cooking
Correct.
oil. Yeah.
Correct. Correct.
But that would come into the problem of the limited scalability. That's again something which is good for now, but it's not an end game because there would never be enough of these waste products
Correct.
from bio sources.
Yeah, and you have to always think where to put it. So I have this fuel available, and there is transportation that I can't convert to electric, like ships and planes. So this is something I should have in mind. It's nice to put it in a car and put stickers on your car. I run 100% HVO, but at the end, we should look at where does it make the most sense to use this rare source of fuel. Yeah, you're right.
Exactly. We should also mention, for completeness, the other point that Toyota makes around promoting hybrids, which is the utility and the convenience aspect of it. I mean, we hear a lot of wailing in the press right now about the slow build out of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Well, that
Correct.
requires a lot of investment and time to build this stuff, get the permitting, and that is slowing down the rollout. The reality of it is, that's a brute reality of how this infrastructure build out happens, and we don't have that time. So again, hybrids, in my view, don't have that utility compromise of having to recharge.
Correct.
It doesn't need the infrastructure. You can carry on essentially driving exactly how you did before. So really, for now, hybrids seem to tick all the boxes. And we are in a world of investment is scarce. Investment is relatively scarce and expensive. So we have to spend our money very carefully. And I'm seeing a real crowding out problem, as we'd say in economics. So that putting lots of investment into vehicles that are not selling and into massive infrastructure build out is crowding out money from other technologies like hybrids that could be delivering much more rapid reductions in CO2. And I just give one example just from yesterday from the trade body for car manufacturers in the UK called the SMMT. They were again reiterating a call for subsidies of effectively £4,000 per unit to sell another 270,000 electric vehicles, which sounds terribly modest and innocuous, but actually is a subsidy of between £6 and £7 billion. And that, I calculated, was equivalent to about a quarter of the UK's defence budget annually. That is, so one call for an apparently relatively modest subsidy for electric vehicles is a quarter of the defence budget. That's where the crowding out is. That's where the contention for scarce investment is happening. And that's why I come to the conclusion that for now, hybrids have a much lower call on investment. We don't need to build out infrastructure, much lower materials requirement. That is a faster route that we can afford towards electrification. And it does seem to be borne out in the sales figures. But I think, Oliver, you're seeing there's similar trends in Germany.
Of course.
I think you're seeing that. Are you seeing calls for subsidies over there too?
As I mentioned in the beginning, the subsidies ran out here. So now there's less subsidies, only the manufacturer given subsidies, or when the manufacturer now try to compensate the run out subsidies a bit with lowering their prices. But it's the same problem here. And the government only has X amount of money. Of course, then they make these special budgets like we just did for our military. They just made 100 billion euros special budget for the military because our military was very run down, very poor. And now with the current threat from Russia, so now they are reinvesting into the military. But the government only has X amount of money. Yeah, they might do some debt every year of 30-40 billion, but that's not enough to really subsidize all subsidies that must be done. But just shifting it to the 5% higher price point of a hybrid, I would say just transfers this debt from the government to the customer. So if instead of subsidizing one BEV, if I pay 5% more on 90 hybrids, I think it's in the end, it's the same amount of money, but it's spread on more shoulders and it's easier to manage. And as I've said in the beginning, if the customer sees the payback for the more money spent, I guess he would be happy to spend it.
And importantly, it delivers a lot more CO2 reduction more quickly. So I think on that note, we'll end for today. I think that's the message coming out of this is that it's not just about how much technology can reduce CO2. It's about how much it costs to reduce that CO2. This is not just a technical question, it's an economics question as well. And hybrids seem to be shining through as the best, most cost-efficient way of addressing climate change for now. So, Oliver, thanks very much for joining, and we will tackle the next topic next week.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much.